I am here at IU Indianapolis at our recording studio and classroom, Clear Lab. It is here in Clear Lab that I have learned pretty much all of my knowledge on recording. I sat right in these chairs, right in front of this screen, and all these speakers, all this equipment for an entire semester. And today I'm privileged enough to use this space for my own project. But no, not my own mix, my own recording project, an experiment and research paper about the alto saxophone. More specifically, how microphone placement along the saxophone can affect the tonal quality.
I've been playing the saxophone for over 10 years. I started in middle school, then continued all throughout high school, and even a little in college. I've been in a bunch of different bands and ensembles over the years, so I've spent a lot of time actually living with the instrument. But honestly, for most of that time, I wasn't really recording the saxophone in any serious way. Almost everything I had was just iPhone videos. Good enough to look back on in memories, but not good enough to really understand how the instrument was being captured or why it sounded the way it did. It is that gap of knowing how to play the instrument but not knowing how to record it well that started this project. Once I started digging into recording, I realized pretty quickly that the saxophone is kind of a nightmare to mic. The sound doesn't just come out of the bell, but it also comes from the tone holes all over the instrument. Lower notes behave one way, while higher notes behave another, and because of that, even small changes in mic placement can totally change the sound. If you move the mic just a few inches away, suddenly the tone feels completely different. If you ever looked up how to mic a saxophone, you've probably seen advice saying, mic the bell for a brighter sound, or move higher for a warmer sound. Now, while that advice isn't wrong, it is also just pretty vague. So if you try to recreate a sound later based off of these descriptions, you're most likely to just be guessing on how the frequencies are actually changing.
So what I'm asking is, how does microphone placement affect the measurable frequency response of the alto saxophone?
To keep everything consistent, all recordings were done in the Clear Lab at IU Indianapolis. I had the wonderful Michelle Antolin come out and volunteer her time to play the saxophone for me, since it would have been pretty hard for me to play, record, and film all at the same time.
Today I'm working with quite a few amazing microphones, and those are the Neumann KM184, this Dayton Audio KM184 calibration microphone, the all-time go-to SM57 by Shure, and this Audio-Technica Pro 35 clip-on microphone.
Every placement was tested using long tones, short tones, a full chromatic scale, and a short musical excerpt of Sunny Side of the Street. In total, I recorded over 345 samples across 11 different microphone placements. Those included the first 3 microphones being more traditionally positioned on stands at different distances around the microphone. As well as 5 of the Audio-Technica clip-on microphone placed at different spots around the sax.
So I divided the saxophone spectrum into 7 different frequency bands. The sub-bass from 20 to 60 Hz, the bass from 60 to 250 Hz, this tends to be the body and the fundamental tone, the low mids at 200 to 500 Hz, the mids from 500 Hz to 2 kHz, which tends to be a lot of the core saxophone sound, the high mids from 2 to 4 kHz with articulation clarity, the presence at 4 to 6 kHz, and the brilliance from 6 to 20 kHz that tends to have your air, that sparkle, and your overtones.
After recording, every take was analyzed using Room EQ Wizard. Now, while REW is more for correcting your room's frequency response, it was a great tool in this sense because I could upload the recording, get the frequency response of the entire recording, and then export every point into a text file, which I later converted into a CSV. This CSV file ended up having over 11 million rows, meaning it's too big to even open in Microsoft Excel or Apple's numbers. Because of this, I had to use tools like OpenAI's ChatGPT and Anthropic's Claude Sonnet to create Python analysis files that could sort through the data, analyze it, come up with the inclusions, make some new charts, and some new graphs.
This is what those external stand placements are actually doing to your saxophone's tone.
These 6 lines represent positions P1 through 6, all normalized to the mid-band. So because of that, we're just looking at the overall shapes of the curves and how they differ in the lows and highs specifically. Now, although it's kind of hard to tell because they do all have that same general shape, there are some differences. For example, having the microphone 7 feet away is picking up less of those fundamental frequencies around 300 or 400 hertz. But it's higher up the spectrum that things become a little bit more diluted. So this graph here is a little easier to understand. One of the main differences you can see in this table is the varied results between the bass and the high mid frequencies. For example, you can see that P3 having the microphones about 6 inches away from the mid body tone holes results in about 11 dB difference between the bass and high mids. While comparatively, those frequency bands are nearly identical when the microphone is 7 feet away, meaning that P6 drastically increased the bass frequencies while slightly decreasing the high mids. Also, you can see that having the microphones about 12 inches away from the bell for P2 resulted in the highest presence value of about -30, while P5 having them up by the neck and mouthpiece resulted in the absolute lowest of about -42. Here's the table of all that data, and again, it backs up all the claims we just made. But on top of that, it also shows our clarity ratio and the spectrum ratio. So for the analysis, we are using 2 calculated ratios, the first of which is the clarity ratio. It is the power of your high mids plus your presence divided by your bass and low mids. The clarity just tells you how much edge and detail you get, while the full spectrum ratio tells you the overall tonal balance. It uses all of the bands in its equation, minus the sub-bass band, which is not used in any of these equations or results since it is simply just air under the saxophone's frequencies. These lower frequencies tend to just be cut out of a mix using a high-pass filter anyways. So having the microphone 6 inches from the mid-body tone holes results in the highest clarity ratio of about 0.2. This would confirm that it is the clearest of the external positions, with an emphasis on the articulation and transients instead of the low-frequency body. But the clip-on microphones is a completely different story. Same instrument, same performer, and the same tests. But the positions themselves ended up being a lot more varied in the responses than the external ones did. As you can see here, it's a little easier to see what the lines are actually doing. Again, this is all normalized to the mid-band average. For instance, you can see that there is some big differences in the low sub-bass. However, this is below the saxophone's tone and is simply just how much of the room is being picked up. To my surprise, having the microphone pushed as far into the bell as possible results in the lowest of the fundamental frequencies, with the highest being it pointed near the mid-body tone holes. Also, the biggest departure in these positions is P11's brilliance. As you can see, having the microphone up by the mouthpiece and neck resulted in a much higher presence. But a little less noticeable is the mid-body's presence being lower than the others. So again, this backs it up with the presence having the most changes among all the positions here. However, that said, a lot of the frequency bands are a lot more different to each other than how they were with the external microphones. So as you can see, having the microphone pointed under the saxophone results in a much lower presence and high mids. Which means although the bass and the low mids aren't too drastically different, the lack of those other frequencies just makes everything seem much more closed in, which as you can see, that results in a clarity score of 0.01. However, interestingly, you may have also noticed the clarity score and the spectrum ratio for P7 being drastically different than the others. I believe it's because of the lack of low frequency response under the fundamental frequencies that caused that spike to happen. But not because of the enhanced highs, but because the denominator of that full spectrum equation nearly collapses. And again, that high clarity ratio is indicated by that lack of low frequencies. But that makes position 8, having the microphone on the exterior of the bell, the clear winner of this category. It has a full spectrum ratio of 10.55 and a clarity ratio of 0.37. Making it the most balanced ratio of these responses, with position 9 being dark and muffled, with 7 and 11 being just fundamentally flawed. Now I would like to add the discrepancies in position 11 specifically are likely to be caused by external factors. When listening to the samples, you can hear a lot of electronic noise. This could have been caused by a faulty microphone, faulty line, or just because the gain had to be cranked to even get a good signal out of it. So 345 recordings later, we have an answer. Not in vague adjectives, but measurable data. Now, I would like to add that I am not trying to replace those adjectives, but instead work with them. These guides on the internet from Shure or Sweetwater are very useful guides and do still say the same thing at the end of the day.
This whole project was less about discovering something new and more about having a different perspective on it. There are so many musicians that don't actually know how their instrument fundamentally works. There are young students who have been playing their saxophone for years, yet have never experienced recording themselves. And I don't just mean recording yourself for funny home videos. I'm saying they need to go out there and try properly recording themselves and make something out of it. I think it's so important to have any new generation of saxophone players loving what they do and how they sound. And the first step to that is knowing how to actually pick it up. And even if you don't have all these fancy microphones, it is still worth a shot to just try it with your phone. But instead of holding or placing your phone in a spot that is not going to pick it up right, you can use this data to approximately figure out where to place that phone to get the best results out of it. Sure, your phone isn't going to have the highest fidelity microphone, but this technology is developing rapidly every day. They are just getting better and better. But at the end of the day, this is just a starting point. Music isn't about the data. It is about what you hear, so trust your ears above all. You should always adjust for your specific context and what you actually want as a mixer, musician, and engineer. Now, I'm not trying to say that this research is the most structurally sound data. There are plenty of issues and discrepancies in how we recorded the saxophone and how we analyzed it. I'm sure there are so many better ways to do this, but I did the best I could given my resources and time. So I want to inspire you to go out and try this yourself. Go grab your instrument, whatever it is, and record yourself. You don't need to have a fancy recording studio or a $10,000 microphone to get results. And if you do get results, visit my website and send them to me. I would love to make a collection of how all these different instruments respond to different mic positions. But if you want the recording type but are very analytical, you can access all of my data for free. Visit carsonquick.com/projects, where you can download my Ableton Live recording session, the REW frequency responses, Python analysis files, the original 11 million row CSV, and possibly more. On top of that, if you enjoyed this and want to learn more, you can check out my full research paper and placement guide. Again, those are both available on my website for free. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and now go make some recordings.